Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Zodiac Bandit, and today I want to try something a little bit different. Normally I talk about stuff in the future. I like to make speculation, predictions, and stuff like that. Today I kind of want to look to the past a little bit and talk about what ifs. We're still speculating, but we're doing some stuff for the past. Speculation on what could have been if these things changed, which I think is a rather interesting concept. I've done that a little bit in the past with some videos, but I want to take a look at some of the, Campaign 3 stuff that could have changed, Campaign 2 stuff, and Campaign 1 stuff that could have changed depending on scenarios playing out just a little bit differently. So let me know what you guys think about this idea, because if there's more that you guys leave in the comments, I would love to try doing it again with some more of them. But yeah, with that being said, let's get started. So I'm going to start with two that are similar to each other. What if Immigen and what if Fern had turned evil during Campaign 3? So I'm going to start with Immigen. I want to talk about when this could have happened at any point in time. So first of all, the first one is if Laudna were to have died. Laura has said this, that if Laudna had died at some point, permanently, there's a good chance that Immigen snaps and she goes and, off to be a villain, and Laura brings in a different character to play as for Campaign 3. Because part of the fun for her in Campaign 3 was that relationship with Laudna. So had this happened, she would have turned evil. The other option for her turning evil would have been if Predathos had, manipulated its way into her mind. And then, again, she would have left and become evil. And I think this is a pretty interesting topic to really start off with, because realistically, she was kind of the thing that was holding up the enemy side. She was the one who was able to turn Liliana back to the side of good, which put a massive, hold on Ludinus's plan. So if Immigen had been there, Predathos likely would have been released a lot sooner, and the gods would have been in a fight for survival. Some of them would have ran, some of them would have died, some of them would have fought back, and, likely would have teamed up with the rest of the party. And I think this would have put the party in more of a pro god side, right? Instead of having the gods sort of, make the choice of if they want to become mortal, which doesn't happen either, by the way. If she turns evil, that option's not there, because she's the one who holds the cards in that scenario. So, with that whole idea there, if she's there as a villain, we're no longer looking at Predathos as a weapon to use against them. It is already being used. So the party have to now fight Immigen, Liliana, potentially Odahan Thule if she's still alive, Ludinus at the same time, and with the power of Predathos backing them. Whether or not Liliana or even Immigen becomes the vessel, who knows? More than likely would have been that Immigen would have been the vessel. That would have been interesting. The other part about all of this is that Laura would have brought in a new character, right? Depending on how things go, which meant Marisha could have also brought in a new character. So we would have had a complete unknown brought into the story, which I think could have been fun as well if that were to happen, which could have been cool. I'm not going to talk about what she could have played, because that's an infinite possibility, but I do like the idea that so much changes if Immigen becomes the bad guy, right? And there is a chance where the party tries to free her from Predathos at some point, and maybe Laura re-enters the scene as Immigen, but who knows? I do think that it's a lot of fun to really speculate on this idea, because, again, if she's evil and she's not on the side of good, Laudna likely doesn't get as much backup in the need for, dealing with Delilah, which is a big deal. The gods don't get turned into mortals, big deal. The image or vision of downfall gets released. Liliana turns into a complete villain, so there's no redemption arc there for her either. So those four major things are some of the biggest plot hooks in Campaign 3. So if you don't have her there as a good guy, you lose all of that. I will say a change that might have happened, we might have more dead party members, because not only would Liliana still be a villain, but Immigen would be aiding her, which means they would likely be aiding Odahan Thule, which is a very, very, very dangerous prospect as far as this conversation goes. Odahan Thule backed up by Liliana and Immigen and Ludinus, we might be looking at a TPK. Now onto the Fern side of it, where she becomes Dark Fern, right? Had Fern become a villain at some point because of her father, or whatever reason that eventually it happened with, maybe Predathos took her over as well, I see a lot of the same stuff sort of happening, but on the Fae side of things. I believe the Fae would get behind Lord Zethuda a little bit more, right? Sora Lord Zethuda, they would back him up, give him more armies, and we would almost for sure see the Fae, the Unseelie Court specifically, backing up the Ruby Vanguard at the key, right? So you now have Vox Machina not just fighting the people of Ruidus, like the Rylorans and all the other people, like specifically Ozo Kruth, but then you also potentially have Lord Zathuda there. You then also have potentially other Archfey there defending, which becomes a much bigger deal to defend that key, which makes it a lot harder for the Vox Machina crew to be able to punch their way through it. I think if this also happens as well, we get much darker versions of Ashton and Aurum. Ashton sort of lightens up because of Fern, and he becomes a lot more playful because of her. So if she's not around, especially if FCG still dies, I see a big issue with Ashton storming as well, where he becomes a lot more problematic. You might see more instances of him trying to absorb a certain fire shard again, and he tries to do something stupid and reckless and ends up dying because of it. As far as Aurum, I could see him going in many various ways, where he decides all he wants to do is go after the Unseelie Court and ignore everything else that's going on with Ruidus, because he wants to deal with his friend. He wants to save his friend in some form or fashion. He needs to save his friend. I could also potentially see this pulling Robbie and Dorian back into the story much sooner, right? Because they need that backup, and they need that extra person who knows Fern to sort of reinforce the idea of potentially turning her back to the side of good. Along with that, we then potentially get more backup from Nana Mori, because they might want to, like, she might want to save Fern as well from the dark side of things. So Nana Mori might be more willing to step up and give other members of the party more power, like she did with Aurum, which I think could be interesting. Maybe she even gives them more items, like maybe she gives them those like spirit horses sooner so they can ride around the Fey realm a little bit faster, like even sooner than they did the first time. Maybe they are able to like skip the whole we need communication trials thing, and they're able to just move around the Fey realm together trying to save Fern. It just really depends on when exactly she turns evil, but I do think if this happens, Nana Mori becomes more of a physical presence in Campaign 3. So now we've talked about what happens if Fern and Immigen turn evil, but what happens if Delilah takes over Laudna? Now, I think, it's a pretty steep road what happens here if Delilah comes back in some form or fashion, right? She obviously wants to revive Silas Briarwood. That would be her main goal, to revive her husband. And how did she do that last time? Well, she went to Vecna. Not to mention she was already working for Vecna before, but she would go to Vecna again and attempt to sort of open the gate so he can come out of whatever realm he's in, or at least so that she can go into that realm and potentially gain more power from him that way, to resurrect Silas Briarwood. This happens, we're in deep shit, right? A bunch of people decide that they need to sort of step up and deal with that, and maybe Ruidus gets less focus, which means that Ludinus gets to sit in the background even more than he already was, because Vecna is a problem the world has already faced once before. So at any point in time, if Laudna gets taken over by Delilah, Vecna becomes a number one priority, and you see Percy become No Mercy Percy once again, because the Briarwoods are back, and that is his main focus. He will no longer give a shit about what's happening at Ruidus. He will only care about dealing with the Briarwoods, which means they now lose Percy DeRollo, who helps them on the initial assault to the fucking Malleus Key. So now we're in a whole world of shit, because we've now just lost a ton of resources because he's burning them elsewhere. He will not help them. Also, he might try to kill the party. If he hears that Delilah has been brought back, he might just go out of his way to kill everyone else in the Bell's Hells, because he warned them already. He said that bringing Laudna back was not a good move, and he will certainly prove it to them. After seeing Delilah being back, he will potentially kill them as well, because No Mercy Percy is not to be fucked with. So, steep hill. You go from Delilah, Cyrus, Vecna, No Mercy Percy. I feel like that is a bad recipe. Let's not have Delilah break out anytime soon, shall we? Also, I see this leading to Immigen leaving, or somehow turning evil, or turning towards Predathos to gain more power, which then leans into Immigen turning evil yet again, right? So, that's a possibility if Laudna gets taken over, because she loves Laudna and she wants to be with her, so she will do anything she needs to gain power to deal with it, which potentially means siding with Predathos. Full circle on this one. So for the next what if, I kind of want to move on to what if Scandlin never came back. Yes, we're now jumping to campaign 1 for these what ifs, and I think I need to start with, if he doesn't come back, that wound never gets closed. The wound between Vox Machina and Scandlin is forever there, which also means that Pike and him never have kids together. So there's an entire family of kids that are in a certain book that just never exist ever, which is very sad and, depressing in many ways. But at the same time, it also means that Vecna, the warning that, Scandlin gives the party that Vecna is coming, or that, there's another ziggurat somewhere, never gets brought to them, which means no one ever really investigates the ziggurat, which means Vecna just gets to build his army in silence until he needs to strike. Part of the things that sort of hurt Vecna in the end was the fact that Vox Machina got a warning and they went in to investigate and sort of deal with whatever was going on. Thus, he had to move his production of things further and faster, and he just had to start his assault. So if that doesn't happen, he can just build until he's ready, and then he appears and starts killing everybody, which is not good. It just means instant death for a lot of people, and, the world basically ends here, which, is a very depressing what if. There is a chance that the Vox Machina crew still win, but they would be minus a Scandlin, who became very clutch at the end. Keep in mind, if he never comes back, he never counterspells. But at the same time, on a more positive note, Vax doesn't get disintegrated by Vecna, and then he doesn't make the deal to become the champion and brought back to life by the Raven Queen. And on top of that, it means he doesn't live for the rest of his life as a servant of hers, or as a champion of hers. So then they're not separated. But unfortunately, to go along with that, they don't live very long if they don't get to take out Vecna. So realistically, even though Vax technically wins in this moment, he still loses, because everyone loses if Vecna is allowed to grow in a lot more strength than he did initially. So you take what you get, right? You can only go so far with these, and that would be the end. They would lose. And for the last what if of this video, which to me is the biggest what if of all Critical Role, and it's the one that spirals the most and changes the most and affects the most in the campaign in which it happens, which is from Campaign 2. What if Mollymauk didn't die? Now, we do know a little bit of how this would work based on what Matt said in the Campaign 2 wrap-up. Lucien would have been a vengeful soul tracking down the party consistently. He would have been a reoccurring villain throughout the entirety of Campaign 2, which would have been super interesting. Now, this, in my opinion, means a lot of the stuff that happens at the end of Campaign 2, where they go to Aor and deal with Cognoza and all of that sort of stuff, the Somnovum, that all happens still. That stuff still happens, which is really cool and really interesting. But their allies change, the locations they go to in the campaign before that change, a lot of things change if Caduceus is never introduced to the story. Keep this in mind. Mollymauk dies. They're then introduced to Caduceus, who helps them break their friends out. This sort of starts a whole process of healing for Yasha. If Caduceus isn't around, this healing might not happen. If Caduceus isn't around, Ford never becomes a paladin of the Wildmother. If Caduceus isn't around, no one releases Yasha from the mind control she's in from the Angel of Iron's cult. This is why I think this is the most spiraling what if we could possibly go down. They were on a dark path before they met Caduceus. Caduceus set them closer to the light side than the dark side. Caduceus shifted them back towards positivity, whereas beforehand they were doing things for the Gentleman, who is a person who, before the party really meets him, is a bad guy. He's a criminal. He lives in an underground base. He is a criminal. And we have to accept this fact. He is a criminal. Until the party start to affect him and change him in interesting ways, he is still a bad guy. They were doing things for the bad guy. They would have had an entire story about dealing with Lorenzo and people up in the Savalier Wood, and it would have been really interesting. But it would have been different from what we got. Because after Mollymauk dies, we start to shift into more personal storytelling stuff. We start going after Ford's backstory a little bit. That's why they go out into Seed in general, to start dealing with these cloven crystals and dealing with Uk'otoa and sort of starting to release him a little bit. That might not happen with him, or it even happens a little sooner, and maybe it happens completely where Uk'otoa gets released. Who knows? Things could have been different in many different ways. But I do think that this is a very interesting idea to sort of look at what changes if Mollymauk doesn't die, right? Maybe Kree joins them for a while, realizes that Mollymauk isn't Lucien, or even to a more extent than she already did, and then leaves again and aids Lucien, the Vengeful Soul, and maybe he becomes the body that Lucien takes over to attack them. Right? I do think this is a never-ending spiral. Maybe they don't, help the Dwendalian Empire come to terms with the Kryn Dynasty, right? They don't give up the beacon at all. Maybe they don't even get caught in that situation with Mollymauk. Maybe they go somewhere else with Mollymauk. Who knows? Maybe Lucien shows up, and when they go to deal with everything that they did before going to the Kryn Dynasty, that doesn't happen. Or maybe Molly is better at hiding the friggin' beacon than Caleb, and maybe Molly's the one who keeps it on him. Who knows? It is a forever spiraling thing that we look at. Keep in mind, Caduceus also freed Villia from her mind control from Vokodo. So Keyleth never reunites with her mother. Again, never-ending spiral of what-ifs here, which I think is fascinating. So let me know what you guys think, and how much further do you think that Mollymauk rabbit hole can truly go? Because I can think of a little bit more as well, but I think I've made my point clear, that would be the biggest what-if thing to change if something like that were to ever happen. So I'm curious to know what you guys think, and let me know how much further that Mollymauk rabbit hole can go down, because I would love to make an entire video about that. I would love to just take Mollymauk dying and seeing all the different places that you guys can think of that I didn't mention here, and maybe I've even forgotten, that how his death affected the Mighty Nine. So I'm very curious as to what you guys think about that, and very curious what you guys think I could add to the rest of these what-ifs. So comment what I can add, comment other what-ifs that I didn't think of or I didn't say yet. So yeah, with all that being said, I will see you guys for whatever video I make next. Peace.